Good evening. I'm Ron Smith, candidate for Josephine County Commissioner, Position 1. I'd like to say that Josephine County is a wonderful place to live. It's a great place to live. I love the mountains. I love the clear rivers that we live in, have in our county. I love the forest lands, and I love the people here. We have a lot of great people in Josephine County, just tremendous people. But we have some challenges ahead of us, too.
And you love your wife.
Yes, I have a lovely wife. And I have a lot of good friends here in this county, and I think that's really the biggest asset we have as people in the county. But we have some challenges ahead of us. One challenge we're going to be faced with is this temporary levy that we have is a 5-year levy. And we got to come up with a solution, unless you guys like property taxes. I'm not really a tax guy. I don't like property taxes. If you understand the layout of Josephine County, taxes will really never work. 8.7% of the land in the county is taxed at the high tax rate. Only 8.7% of the land. You got 69% owned by the feds, state, county, and nonprofits. That adds up to 73% of the land base in the county. There is no tax off that land, none. So you're left with about 27%, 8.7% of that is taxed at the higher tax rate. The majority of what's left is private forest lands. That has a deferred tax of 40%. So when you pass a tax for property taxes to fund law enforcement, you're putting the burden of that tax on about 8.7% of the property, mostly private property owners. So I'm not a tax guy. That land that's out there, that 69% of that land, that's what funded everything in our county for a long time. So I want to work with the federal agencies to cut down on these catastrophic wildfires, and they had these smoke-filled summers. Did you like that summer last summer? Did you guys enjoy breathing that smoke? There's a lot of research going on that smoke that's very detrimental to your health, very harmful to your health because of the particle size. And if you want to talk about carbon, forest fires like we've had here in the last couple of decades release more carbon in the atmosphere. Not only that, that carbon that was locked up in the wood, in the forest, is released into the air. That could have been turned into lumber and put in the house and still kept that carbon. So the forest lands are a big part of our county. It's really historically and traditionally what we lived off of. That's why we had, from 1980, we didn't even have property tax. The forest produced everything we needed. The other part of our...
Excuse me, I agree with everything you're saying.
Okay, thanks. You got your vote. So really the land base is going to be a big part of Josephine County if you understand the county. I was born here. I'm a native of Josephine County, born in Grants Pass. My family homesteaded out in the Illinois Valley close to 100 years ago. So I know the valley really, really well. And I want to be a commissioner for all the people of the county, not just for the urban areas, but for all the rural counties. Williams, Wolf Creek, O'Brien, Illinois Valley, North Valley, these are all part of the county. And I think sometimes they get neglected and they feel like they're not represented. And so many people focus on the big urban area, Grants Pass. We only have 2 incorporated cities, Grants Pass and Cave Junction. I think Medford, if you compare our county to Jackson County, there's a tremendous amount of difference. Jackson County is about 50% federally controlled. But if you look at White City, I could take all the industrialized land in Josephine County, put it in one big hunk, and plop it down in Boise Cascades lot at Central Point. It wouldn't even cover a quarter of the lot. We have a challenge ahead of us. Our challenge is how do we meet the growth? How do we meet affordable housing? How are we going to meet the tax base? How are we going to face these challenges? All of those things are going to be based around land use. That's really the key. So that's really, I think, where somebody as a commissioner should be focusing. And everybody knows that these land use issues are huge. And that's really one of the biggest things the commissioner does. He does land use. So public safety is going to be a big key. So we got a 4-year window now, something like about 4 years. So what are we going to do to fund the sheriff? Are we going to come back with another tax issue in the next few years? I think that's where it's headed unless we come up with an answer. There's some lawsuits going on right now in the county. One is over ONC. That's a big deal. That ONC land, Oregon California Railroad land, supplied everything we needed for decades, almost close to 100 years. That's going to be a huge issue. We're going to have to see how that lawsuit comes out. They're not nearly to the harvest level they could be. The county's doing a good job on their 30,000 acres. They've increased their harvest, and that's bringing a lot of money to the general fund. But it's not really getting into the sheriff's department. It's helping the youth services, youth correctional, but it's really not helping our sheriff's department. So that's one of the biggest challenges I see. The other challenge I see is we have a terrible problem with meth and heroin. I don't think anybody wants to talk about that. We're all so busy talking about marijuana, we kind of forgot about meth and heroin. But that's really a source of a lot of our property crimes, is that meth and heroin. It's also a source of a lot of the homelessness we have in the county. So I need to focus on, I think I would focus on that and how we can keep that on the front burner and talking about how to solve those problems. Treatment doesn't work. Treatment helps the individual. But as soon as that guy gets clean, he moves on and he tries to get his life together, you got two more behind him. As long as those people are out there producing the meth and the heroin, bringing it into our county, you're going to continue to have an epidemic. So that needs to be kept on the front burner, and I think people need to talk about that. Affordable housing is a terrible issue in this county. There's just none. But we're stuck against a state law that doesn't allow us to build outside of the urban growth boundaries. So, you know, I was talking to a builder. He has a construction company here. We got talking about this land issue, and I says, you know, we have affordable housing problem here. There's just no places to even rent. And I says that if you were to build a big apartment complex, something like Riverwoods, outside the urban growth boundaries, where would you put it? There's no place to put it. You got no place to put that, something like that, a complex, Riverwood size, to help alleviate some of the affordable housing problem. So there's a challenge. I know the commissioners have addressed and petitioned the state to lighten up on that law. But that law is a roadblock for us for anything outside the urban growth boundaries. So, you know, those land use issues. And I hate to feel like a broken record here, but Peter knows what I'm talking about, land use issues, don't you? Yeah, it's a terrible thing because they keep burdening us with more regulations. I'm not for regulations. I'm not for taxation. I want to see us be prosperous. And I think the best way to be prosperous, when the federal government took our tax base away, they made a promise. That promise was, we're going to compensate you for that loss of tax base in a form called payment in lieu of taxes. They're shortchanging us. They're not living up to their promise. We need to hold their feet to the fire and make them live up to that promise to supply that income off of that land. How long would it take to log that land that burnt in the Chetco Bar fire? Almost 200,000 acres. How long would it take? 100 years? 200 years? If you add the fires we've had in this county, Douglas Complex, Biscuit Fire, Chetco Bar fire, you couldn't have logged that land in all of our lifetime. And there sits that deadwood that has value for a couple of years, that could be harvested and fund our county sheriff, but it doesn't. It goes to waste and litigation. The Forest Service and the BLM are required to coordinate with the counties. And I don't know if you know about coordination, but coordination is a big issue and it's going to be a huge issue in the future. The county, I just talked to legal counsel and he said they're starting a committee to address coordination. Coordination is required in the 1976 Federal Land Management Policy Act. It's required in the 1972 National Environmental Policy Act. The feds are required, when they make a forest plan, to come and sit with the county and try to get their forest plans, their land management plans, to match with our plans. I asked a longtime commissioner here, why have we never sued the feds over not coordinating? He said, I don't know. Maybe we just never felt we had the money, and maybe we just didn't have the willpower. Well, I have that willpower. I have that desire to make sure that land base that supported this county for 100 years is part of the equation again. That's a necessary thing. As a commissioner, I have very little to say about what goes on inside Grants Pass. They gave that up a long time ago. The only time I have anything to say that happens at Grants Pass or inside Cave Junctions in an emergency. Other than that, we're going to deal with everything outside of those urban route boundaries. So I think one of the biggest issues I'd like to focus on is development, economic development. We need to streamline the process. We need to welcome people in. I know some people that have tried to start businesses here outside the urban growth boundary. It's an impossibility. If you're doing anything to produce from the land, it's really a hurdle to get over that because you have LCDC, Senate Bill 100, and all of these issues to deal with. You can't really get started because you have, if you wanted to produce, say, gravel, you'd have to go through 15 different agencies, 3 or 4 Indian tribes, and a whole bunch of rigmarole just to be able to get started. That process needs to be streamlined. You know, producing from the land is really what Josephine County needs to do. They need to produce from the land. What time is it? That time? A few minutes? Okay. We need to produce from the land. If you look at the history of Josephine County, from the day it was founded, we were built on producing from the land. The beginning in 1850 started with the miners. They came into the Illinois Valley in 1850 and they started producing from the land. And if you look at what happened in 1942, the largest employer in the whole county. Does anybody know what the largest employer in the whole county was in 1942? It was one gold mine called the Benton Gold Mine. They employed more people than anybody else. In 1935, they invented the chainsaw, and after World War II, because of commodity prices, gold mining never really came back because it was shut down during the war. But timber became back. Timber became very important for us. Did you know Josephine County grows some of the strongest Douglas fir in the world? Our Douglas fir is actually the strongest Douglas fir in the world. People seek out our Douglas fir from Southern Oregon because it grows so slow, it grows so strong. It's some of the strongest Douglas fir. We used to have 37 sawmills in the county. Most of them were mom and pop. My family had a sawmill out in the Illinois Valley. The mill pond's still there. We have no sawmills today. We can still benefit from that harvest of timber because on the ONC land, that's divided up to a formula they had in 1937. Depending on how much ONC land you had in 1937, you get a percentage based on that. Josephine County is number 3. So when there's a harvest on any of the 18 ONC lands, Josephine County gets a big hunk of change on that. But right now they're in a litigation because the feds have not lived up to the harvest amount. We're not even harvesting close to the growth. Our problem is that we have too many trees, and that's a recipe for catastrophic wildfires. You know, we should be thinning out the forest, and if we just went out there and thinned the forest, managed it for its health, we would make money, we could fund our sheriff, we would have less catastrophic wildfires, less smoky summers. So, you know, we got to address some serious things. Josephine County is a great place to live. It really is. I've lived here most of my life. Almost died here a couple times. I'm still here, still kicking, and still wanting to fight for the people of Josephine County. So I'd like to vote this coming election. I'd like to serve the people of Josephine County, not only those in Grants Pass, but all the outlying counties. So my name's Ron Smith. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.